I want to drop you right into this deeply intimate and honestly visceral scene. I want you to just imagine you are 17 years old. You are standing in the middle of your perfectly neat floral wallpapered bedroom.
Right, and it is April of 1968.
Exactly. You have a Smith Corona typewriter sitting on your desk,
Mhm.
and there's an unfinished editorial arguing against the Vietnam War, currently sitting right there in the carriage.
Because you are the high school valedictorian. You have this pristine, meticulously mapped out life that leads straight to Stanford and then, off to Paris to be a journalist.
But right now, you are standing in front of your bedroom mirror,
Hmm.
and you have just stripped off all of your clothes. You are staring at a body that suddenly feels like it belongs to a total stranger.
Yeah, you are looking at newly rounded hips. Your breasts are swollen and tender to the touch.
And you look down at your ankles, and they are so puffy that they no longer fit into your favorite pair of everyday Keds.
And the terrifying, undeniable truth is finally settling into your bones.
You haven't bled in months.
Oh man, it is a profoundly quiet, incredibly private moment, but the tension in that bedroom is just absolute.
It really is. Because we, looking back from the modern day, know exactly what that mirror is reflecting.
Right, it is the exact moment the floor completely drops out from under this young woman's carefully constructed reality.
So the young woman we were talking about is named Baker, and her story is the narrative engine for the source material of today's deep dive. We are looking at a historical novel by Kate Schatz, and it's titled Where the Girls Were.
But our mission today is not just to recap a really gripping work of fiction, right? I mean, that book is a key that unlocks a hidden and frankly staggering piece of American history.
It really is staggering. We are going to explore the reality of the estimated 1.5 million young women who were systematically and secretly sent away to maternity homes in the decades leading up to Roe v. Wade.
To even begin to comprehend a number like that, like 1.5 million women simply vanishing from society for months at a time, we have to meticulously set the historical stage. We are looking at 1968.
Right, the summer of love era.
Exactly. Culturally, when we conjure up 1968, we envision a very specific montage. We see the free love movement, the political revolutions, the massive anti-war protests, the explosion of the counterculture.
The air is supposed to be thick with the promise of utter liberation.
It is. But as we are going to see through Baker's eyes, the rules of this new, supposedly emancipated society did not apply equally. There was a massive structural blind spot in the Cultural Revolution, specifically regarding women's bodily autonomy.
So we want to invite you to explore this narrative. It is beautifully written, it is devastating, and it is ultimately a story of intense defiance. We need to figure out how Baker goes from living this pristine, mid-century sitcom existence straight into the terrifying shadows of pre-Roe America.
And to do that, we actually have to rewind the clock a few months before that moment at the mirror. We have to go back to the catalyst, which happens on New Year's Eve heading into 1968.
Right, it is so important to understand who Baker is before everything changes. She is the archetypal good girl. But she isn't naive. She is actually incredibly pragmatic.
Yeah, she balances the bookkeeping ledgers for her family just to help keep her father's car dealership afloat. She understands numbers, she understands consequences, and she is fiercely ambitious.
She wants to be a hard-hitting journalist in Paris. And her mother, Rose, is the ultimate mid-century perfectionist. The text gives us these brilliant details about Rose.
Oh, absolutely. Like how she masks the family's underlying financial instability by throwing these immaculate patio parties.
Yes. She serves fancy French champagne and imported Italian olives floating in little bowls with bay leaves.
It's all about control. For Rose, survival is entirely about keeping up appearances. If it looks perfect on the outside, then it is perfect.
And the pressure that puts on Baker is suffocating. I mean, Baker is the golden child. She is the one who is supposed to succeed, elevate the family's status, and make all of Rose's sacrifices worthwhile.
But she's also just a teenager who wants to breathe. And that desire just to breathe, to experience a fraction of the vibrant world shifting outside her neat suburban lawn, leads her to make a completely standard teenage calculation.
She lies to her mother.
She lies to her mother. She tells Rose she is just going to hang out locally for New Year's Eve.
But instead, she sneaks off to San Francisco with her older, wild, bohemian cousin, May. And the sensory shift that Kate Schatz writes here is just brilliant.
It's like night and day.
Right. Baker leaves her mother's meticulously staged patio with the olives and the bay leaves, and suddenly she is crammed into the back of a panel van full of hippies. She is smelling campfire smoke and stale dirt and peppermint on the breath of a guy named Wiley.
They walk into a concert at the Fillmore, and it is a total sensory explosion. It's basically a baptism into the counterculture.
It really is. There are swirling liquid light shows projecting on the walls, the air is thick with patchouli and marijuana smoke, and the rock and roll is so loud it literally shakes her teeth.
And in the middle of this chaos, she connects with Wiley. They share this brief, intoxicating romance, and it lasts for exactly 5 weekends.
5 weekends of sneaking around, feeling alive, feeling like she is part of this massive cultural awakening. But I want to pause here because there's a massive cognitive dissonance happening.
Okay, let's unpack that.
Well, Baker steps out of her mother's rigid world and into the summer of love, and she makes a fundamental miscalculation. She looks around at the hippies, the protesters, the musicians, and she assumes that the freedom she is witnessing applies to her.
Wow, yeah. That assumption is the core psychological trap of the era for young women. Baker observes the counterculture, the fast girls, the boys burning their draft cards, the concept of a consequence-free existence, and she genuinely believes she can temporarily try on their freedom.
She thinks she can step out of her life, have a 5-week adventure, and then step right back into her valedictorian shoes.
Exactly, but she fundamentally misunderstands the mechanics of the free love movement because the rhetoric of the revolution was universal, but the biology wasn't.
Oh, that is such a sharp way to put it.
The cultural narrative of liberation was, for young women, largely an illusion. I mean, the men in that movement could tune in, drop out, sleep around, and simply walk away when it was over. But young women were still tethered to strict, unforgiving biological and societal realities.
And when Baker's period stops, that entire illusion shatters instantly.
Right. She realizes that the counterculture was perfectly happy to dismantle the social rules surrounding sex, but they had absolutely no infrastructure or support system for the women who were left carrying the physical consequences.
The revolution expected women to be liberated in the bedroom, but punished them with the exact same conservative societal ruin if they got pregnant.
Which brings us crashing right back into that bedroom, standing in front of the mirror. The panic just sets in.
Baker is a math person, right? She balances ledgers. She is running the calculus in her head. She skipped homework assignments. She missed her editorial deadline at the school paper, all for 5 weekends of feeling free.
And now she is staring at a total dead end. She has to find a way out. So she goes to her cousin, May, the one who took her to the Fillmore. And May quietly hands Baker a pamphlet for an organization called the Society for Humane Abortion.
This specific detail anchors the novel deep in historical fact. In 1968, finding information about terminating a pregnancy was not just difficult, it was highly illegal. May is taking a massive risk just handing her that piece of paper.
She really is. And Baker takes the pamphlet and makes a clandestine phone call from a payphone. She gets connected to a woman who just calls herself Jane.
And we have to highlight the reality of that call. The real-life Jane Collective, which operated in Chicago and inspired networks across the country, functioned as a clandestine underground service.
Yeah, and the woman on the phone offers Baker an appointment. The cost is a staggering $500, but the woman also gives Baker a very explicit warning.
Right. She tells this 17-year-old girl that simply having this phone conversation is a crime. Furnishing information about abortion to a minor was punishable by heavy fines and actual prison time.
Baker is completely stunned that a faceless stranger on a telephone is willing to risk a felony charge just to help her. But securing the appointment is only the first hurdle.
The actual logistics of trying to access this underground healthcare are pure nightmare fuel. The book walks us through Baker's desperate attempt to get to this appointment. She has to take a bus into a strange part of the city. She gets lost wandering near a concrete freeway overpass.
She is terrified of being recognized. She is essentially navigating a criminal underworld just to access medical care.
Exactly. When she finally locates the address, she walks into this dark, dingy stairwell, and it smells overwhelmingly of Lysol.
Oh, the Lysol detail is so grim.
It is. The author uses that specific scent to trigger a visceral reaction in Baker. Baker remembers a whispered family story about a girl who nearly died from internal bleeding after trying to use Lysol to induce a miscarriage. So the smell of the hallway itself is a warning of death.
She climbs the stairs, her heart is pounding, and when she gets to the door, there isn't a doctor waiting for her. There is a man in a sharp suit who looks her up and down and immediately threatens to call the cops if she doesn't have the cash right now.
The sheer, overwhelming panic completely overtakes her. The survival instinct kicks in, and she turns and physically runs away. She flees back to the perceived safety of her mother's house.
If we look at the societal mechanics at play here, Baker is trapped in an impossible binary. Abortion is largely illegal and heavily criminalized. So option one is what she just experienced: risk her life, her health, and her freedom in unregulated, dangerous underground environments run by people who might be predatory.
In option 2,
Option two is to carry the pregnancy to term as an unwed mother. But in 1968 middle-class America, the concept of the unwed mother was completely pathologized. You weren't just seen as someone who made a mistake. You were viewed by psychologists and sociologists as morally defective, perhaps even deeply psychologically disturbed.
it was a stain that you couldn't wash off.
Right. It meant total societal ruin. She would be shunned, her family's business could suffer, and her educational prospects would instantly vanish. There was absolutely no socially acceptable middle ground.
You were either a criminal or you were an outcast.
And it is precisely that absolute lack of safe, legal, and socially supported options that created the massive demand for the secretive maternity home industry. It funneled millions of panicked women into these institutions because they had literally nowhere else to go.
And that funneling process begins the moment Baker's secret is discovered, because biology dictates that she cannot hide this forever. Her mother, Rose, eventually notices the physical changes. She realizes the truth.
And the scene shifts to this incredibly chilling car ride. They don't go to Baker's friendly, lifelong pediatrician. Rose drives her in total silence to a specialist, a man named Dr. Bell.
And the appointment is shockingly cold. It is purely clinical. He examines Baker, doesn't offer a shred of comfort, and flatly states the timeline. She is 13 weeks pregnant.
The medical establishment at this time often worked in direct collusion with the social expectation of secrecy. Dr. Bell isn't there to care for Baker's emotional well-being. He is there to confirm the problem so it can be managed.
And the immediate reality of that problem crashes down on them in that doctor's office. If her high school finds out she is pregnant, she will be expelled instantly. This is 2 months before graduation.
She will lose her valedictorian title. Her acceptance to Stanford will be revoked. Her entire future, the one she meticulously planned, will just evaporate.
Which brings us to Rose's reaction. Because Rose does not react like a nurturing mother comforting a terrified child. She reacts like a crisis manager dealing with an existential threat to the family's corporate image.
She looks at her daughter and delivers a mandate. She tells Baker, head high, mouth shut, eyes on the future, not the past.
Let's really look at that reaction, because as a reader, you initially recoil. It feels incredibly cold. It feels actively cruel. Baker is sobbing, her life is falling apart, and Rose is basically organizing a PR cover-up.
It is brutal.
But I want to propose a different way to look at this. Is Rose actually a monster? Or is she just an incredibly ruthless strategist playing the terrible hand that society dealt her? If society has decided that an unwed pregnancy is a fatal blow to a family's standing, isn't Rose's absolute emotional detachment the only way she can actually save her daughter's life?
That is the essential conflict of the mid-century mother-daughter dynamic in these situations. Rose understands the brutal economics of reputation. She knows that if her husband's colleagues at the car dealership find out, the business will hemorrhage clients.
She knows the neighbors will ostracize them.
She knows Stanford will not take an unwed mother. In Rose's mind, preserving the pristine image of the family is not just vanity. It is the only form of protection she has left to offer. It is a harsh, unfeeling survival mechanism.
To save Baker's future, Rose calculates that she must entirely erase Baker's present. And to execute that erasure, Rose makes the only choice the system allows her.
She packs Baker's things, drives her to San Francisco, pulls up to a grand, dusty Victorian house, and drops her daughter off.
This marks our transition into the intensely claustrophobic secret world of the maternity home.
We need to examine the physical space of this home because the architecture itself is deeply symbolic of its function. It is a massive Victorian mansion that supposedly survived the 1906 San Francisco earthquake.
The interior is described as being filled with faded, heavy oriental rugs, oppressive velvet furniture, and dark stained glass windows.
It is a place that is fundamentally stuck in the past. The outside world is 1968. It is vibrating with change and protest. But the inside of this house operates on the moral codes of 1898.
The facility is run by a severe administrator named Mrs. White, and she is aided by a pale, anxious young assistant named Anna.
Rose literally walks Baker up the steps, hands over a suitcase filled with these hideous tent-like maternity dresses, tells Baker to be good, and then just drives away.
The door shuts, and Baker realizes she has been banished to a shadow world. But she also quickly realizes she is not alone in the shadows. The author introduces us to an incredibly vivid, diverse cast of characters. These are the other girls who have been hidden away by their own families.
And it's crucial that Schatz makes them distinct individuals because it combats the historical erasure that treated all these women as a single, shameful monolith.
Exactly. You have Michelle, who is Baker's new roommate. Michelle is tough, she's cynical, she smokes constantly, and devastatingly, this is her second time in a maternity home.
Wow, her second time.
Yeah. And then you have Marcy, who is this picture-perfect, wealthy, blonde debutante who looks like she should be on a yacht, not locked in a Victorian house. There is Janie, a heartbreakingly earnest girl from the Midwest. Janie actually wanted to marry her boyfriend and keep the baby, but her parents forcibly shipped her away to avoid a local scandal.
It is so tragic.
There's Carol, a devout, quiet Christian girl who used to sing in her church choir. You have Lizzie, the rebellious, sarcastic folk singer who arrived clutching a guitar case. And then there is Ida. Ida is tiny, she is terrified, and she is only 14 years old.
Imagine the psychological whiplash for all of these girls. They come from entirely different backgrounds, different economic brackets, different belief systems. But the moment they cross the threshold of that Victorian home, the institution begins a systematic process of stripping away their individuality.
What do you mean by that?
I like to think of these maternity homes not as care facilities, but as social laundering facilities.
Oh, that is a chilling way to put it. How does that work?
To think about how money laundering works.
Yeah.
You take something illicit, you run it through a complex, hidden system, and it comes out the other side looking legitimate and clean. These homes did the exact same thing with human lives. A family's reputation is soiled by an unwed pregnancy. The pregnant girl goes into the facility, that's the hidden wash cycle. The institution extracts the baby and hands it over to a deserving, wealthy, married couple. That's the clean product.
And the young woman is sent back out into society, flattened and folded, with strict instructions to pretend the entire process never happened.
Exactly. And to make that laundering process work, the rules of concealment inside the house are absolute. It borders on psychological warfare. The girls are strictly forbidden from using their last names with each other. Their identities are severed.
They are forced to sit down and write these agonizingly fake postcards to their friends and extended families. The administration makes them pretend they are away at elite boarding schools, or visiting sick relatives, or studying abroad.
Michelle, the cynical roommate, tells Baker a story about a girl who was forced to sign her postcards. Heidi, so her family could pretend she was off skiing in the Swiss Alps, while she was actually swelling up in a dusty basement in San Francisco.
It forces the girls to become active participants in their own erasure. Every time they write a fake postcard, they are validating the lie that their current reality is shameful and must be hidden.
And it gets worse. When Mrs. White allows the girls to go outside for their brief, highly regimented daily walks around the neighborhood, she forces every single one of them to wear a fake, cheap wedding ring.
Wait, really? Just to go for a walk?
Yes. Mrs. White claims this is to protect their dignity from the judgmental stares of the neighbors.
But we have to be clear about who that dignity actually serves. It certainly doesn't serve the girls who know the rings are a lie. The fake rings are designed entirely to maintain the illusion of the acceptable nuclear family for the outside world.
It protects the neighborhood from having to acknowledge the reality of unwed pregnancy. The psychological toll of this constant role-playing is profound. The administration's unstated goal is to ensure the girls feel completely temporary.
They are endlessly told, this is just a brief blip in your life. You will go home, you will move on, and you will forget this. The system does not view them as mothers-to-be. It views them purely as vessels or incubators, tasked with supplying the booming mid-century adoption market.
That transactional nature is perfectly captured in the terrifying euphemisms the administration uses. When a girl's water breaks and it is time for her to give birth, nobody says she is having a baby.
The phrase used in the house is that the girl is going over. It sounds like a military casualty. She goes into labor, she is quietly whisked out the back door in the middle of the night to a partnered hospital, and she never, ever returns to the Victorian house.
Her bed is simply stripped, her remaining belongings are packed up, and it is as if she completely vanished from the earth.
That abrupt disappearance is designed to be a feature, not a bug of the system. It is meant to traumatize the remaining girls into compliance and ensure they remain isolated in their fear.
But this is where the historical reality in Schatz's novel reveals the profound irony of the maternity home system. The administration's entire blueprint relies on keeping the girls isolated, ashamed, and focused only on themselves.
Right.
But by taking dozens of young women, stripping them of their outside lives, and forcing them into a shared labor class, the system accidentally creates the exact conditions for a sanctuary of profound solidarity.
Which perfectly transitions us to what happens in the basement. Because the administration needs to keep these girls occupied, so they mandate these daily arts and crafts sessions. They gather everyone in a damp basement room for a latch-hook rug class.
It sounds so mundane, but it's crucial.
It is. The girls sit in a circle staring at these absurdly innocent canvases printed with little kittens and daisies and rainbows. The instructor is a woman named Sir Charlotte. She is an older, chain-smoking woman who clearly doesn't want to be there either, and she frequently steps outside into the alley to smoke.
And the very second the heavy basement door clicks shut behind her, the entire atmosphere of the room shifts. The girls drop their guarded, polite facades.
Over these canvases of ducklings, they start whispering. They start sharing their deepest traumas, their intense fears about childbirth, and their boiling anger at the men who abandoned them and the families that banished them.
That basement room essentially transforms into a subversive, underground consciousness-raising group. It is really the only space where the mandated silence is broken.
And this is where Baker's true personality resurrects itself. She was stripped of her future as a journalist, but the instinct to document the truth is still hardwired into her.
She realizes that all these stories are going to disappear the moment these girls go over, so she begins acting as a secret war correspondent for unwed mothers.
She manages to scrounge up a notebook, and she hides a journal stuffed deep between the mattress and the metal springs of her bed. In the dead of night, she writes it all down. She writes down Janie's heartbreak over her Midwestern boyfriend. She documents the terrifying details of Marcy's near miss with an illegal abortion. She records the trauma of 14-year-old Ida.
By performing that action, Baker is inherently rejecting the core premise of the maternity home. The home says, you are temporary, you are shameful, you will be forgotten.
By writing down their actual names and their specific pain, Baker is stating, you exist, your pain is real, and it deserves to be recorded in the historical record.
It is a vital act of preservation before the institution can enforce mass amnesia. And it is a brilliant contrast to the official, mandatory group counseling sessions they're subjected to upstairs.
Oh, the counseling sessions are rough. The home employs a social worker named Mary Ann, and Mary Ann's sessions are a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She doesn't ask the girls how they feel.
No, she walks around the circle, staring them down, and she asks one repeating question. Who can help the baby?
And she uses silence and peer pressure to force the girls to quietly answer, a family. She systematically forces them to verbally agree that because they are unwed, they are inherently unfit.
She coerces them into adopting the mindset that surrendering their child is not just an option, but the only morally acceptable choice a good girl would make.
The clinical term for what Mary Ann is doing is institutional gaslighting.
It absolutely is. It is a highly coordinated form of coercion. She tells Baker directly, we know best. You got yourself into this shameful situation, and we, the adults, are graciously helping you out of it.
The entire objective of these counseling sessions is to systematically dismantle the girl's sense of agency. Because if you can convince a woman she is entirely powerless and morally compromised, she will compliantly sign the adoption relinquishment papers when the time comes, without putting up a fight.
But the psychological grip of the administration is starting to slip because the girls are talking to each other. And there is one specific scene in the latch-hook rug class that I think perfectly encapsulates the era.
Right, when Lizzie, the sarcastic folk singer, is working on her rug, and she casually brings up her aunt.
Yeah, she describes her aunt as a liber lawyer, a women's liberation lawyer living in Boston. And Lizzie announces to the basement that her aunt insists the laws are changing and that abortion will soon be safe and fully legal across the country.
The reaction in that room is explosive. It instantly fractures the solidarity of the group. Janie, the devout Midwesterner, drops her yarn and is genuinely horrified. She argues that it is a crime and a mortal sin.
But Marcy and Michelle lean in. They are intensely intrigued and sympathetic to the idea that they shouldn't be forced to go through this.
That scene is a structural marvel within the novel, because Schatz uses that basement as a microcosm for the entire cultural war happening across American womanhood in 1968.
Look at who is in that room. You have entrenched traditional religious conservatism sitting elbow to elbow with the radical emerging second-wave feminist movement.
These young women are literally physically pregnant with the consequences of the old patriarchal system, while they are simultaneously whispering in the dark about the possibility of a new, liberated one. They are trapped right on the fault line of history.
And as they debate these new ideas of bodily autonomy, Baker is furiously writing it all down in her hidden journal.
Yes, and that documentation is radical because she isn't just taking dictation. By writing down their stories, she is helping them synthesize their experiences.
She's giving these girls the vocabulary to understand their own exploitation. Oppressive systems rely on their victims lacking the language to describe what is being done to them.
By naming the abuse, Baker gives them the tools to conceptually fight back. And the physical act of hiding that very journal leads Baker to uncover a much deeper, darker layer of history within the house.
She is kneeling on the floor, feeling around under the slats of her bed to safely stash her notebook, and her fingers brush against a piece of paper taped to the wood.
She pulls it out. It is a folded, unsent letter. It is dated a full year prior, July 1967. The handwriting belongs to a girl named Kitty, and the letter is addressed to a woman named Pat McGinnis.
And we should note for our listeners, Pat McGinnis is a real historical figure. She was one of the earliest, most radical abortion rights activists in California. She famously handed out instructional pamphlets on how to self-induce abortions when it was highly illegal to do so.
So the fact that Kitty was writing to Pat McGinnis tells us exactly how desperate she was. Baker reads the letter, and it is a frantic plea for help. Kitty writes that she is trapped inside the home, the walls are closing in, and she begs Pat for information on how to contact the underground abortion network.
The most chilling line is Kitty stating she is terrified that if she doesn't get help from the outside, she will try to end the pregnancy herself.
Baker reads this, and she is absolutely paralyzed with a cold sweat because the letter was clearly never mailed. So she goes to the closet in the corner of her room, pushing aside the tent-like maternity dresses, and she looks at the plaster wall.
Past residents have carved their names into the wood to prove they were there. Margaret, Donna, Patty, Catherine.
And right in the middle, deeply gouged into the wall, is Kitty.
It shifts the narrative entirely. Baker is no longer just observing the present, she is unearthing an active cover-up. She has found the literal ghost of the institution.
Baker has to know what happened to Kitty. And the truth comes out in this incredibly tense, claustrophobic scene in the dark washroom at night. Baker finds Anna, the pale, anxious assistant administrator, having a full-blown panic attack in the bathroom.
It turns out Anna used to be Kitty's roommate before she was promoted to an administrative role. Baker corners her with the letter, and Anna completely breaks down. She confesses the actual truth.
Which shatters the official narrative that Ms. White had constructed.
Completely shatters it. The official story, the one in the police report and the one Mrs. White told the other girls, was that Kitty was severely depressed and committed suicide by intentionally throwing herself down the grand wooden staircase.
But Anna, sobbing in the dark, tells Baker what actually happened in that very bathroom. Kitty didn't jump.
No, she didn't. Kitty died from massive hemorrhaging and infection following a desperate, self-induced abortion attempt using a wire coat hanger and a piece of rubber tubing.
She bled to death on the tiles trying to escape her forced pregnancy, and Mrs. White and Mary Ann, upon finding the body, deliberately covered it up.
They staged it as a suicidal fall to protect the maternity home's pristine reputation, to keep the police from asking too many questions, and to ensure the lucrative adoption supply chain wasn't interrupted by a scandal.
The revelation of Kitty's true fate is the devastating logical endpoint of the societal mechanics we've been discussing. The institution claims it exists to shelter and protect these young women from society's judgment.
But Kitty's death proves that the institution will ruthlessly protect itself at the fatal expense of the women it houses. Kitty is the ultimate victim of the lack of safe medical options.
But the brilliance of the narrative structure here is that the author immediately pairs this literal physical ghost of the institution with a deeply personal, familial ghost.
Right, because right after discovering how Kitty died, Baker is subjected to a mandated, highly supervised weekend visit with her mother, Rose. Rose takes Baker out of the house to a diner for milkshakes.
The tension across the table is suffocating. Baker is vibrating with anger about the hypocrisy of the home, about Kitty, about being locked away. And finally, over a Coca-Cola, Rose's rigid facade cracks. She makes a shocking, world-altering confession to her daughter.
This is where we delve into the transmission of generational trauma.
Rose looks at Baker and reveals that back in the 1930s, during the depths of the Great Depression, she was a teenager living in Nebraska. She got pregnant by a local boy. And she, too, was quietly packed onto a train and sent away to a massive maternity home in Chicago.
And Rose didn't just go once. She reveals she surrendered 2 separate babies to closed adoptions before she ever met Baker's father.
Rose looks at her devastated daughter and defends her own strictness. She defends the secrecy, the patio parties, the obsession with image. She repeats her absolute mantra to Baker. We do what we have to do. Head high, mouth shut, eyes on the future, not the past.
Think about the psychological earthquake that causes for Baker. It forces us to ask a deeply uncomfortable question about how trauma operates within families.
Rose tells Baker that this exact cycle of banishment and shame has been happening to women since the dawn of time. Rose honestly believed that by never speaking of it, by burying the trauma, she was protecting Baker from the ugliness of the world.
But in reality, her silence only guaranteed that when it happened to Baker, the cycle of isolation would repeat itself flawlessly.
It is an absolute gut punch for the reader. Throughout the entire novel, you feel like Baker has been fighting this massive, unfeeling villain. The villain is the patriarchal system, the restrictive expectations, and the icy, unyielding coldness of her own mother.
But in that diner, Baker essentially reaches out, pulls off the villain's mask, and finds her own mother's traumatized, weeping face underneath.
And I kept asking myself as I read it, does Rose's confession excuse her lack of empathy for Baker? Or does it make it infinitely worse that she knowingly subjected her own flesh and blood to the exact same psychological torture she went through?
It entirely complicates our understanding of Rose, moving her from an antagonist to a tragic figure. If we break down the psychological mechanics, both Kitty and Rose are victims of the exact same system. A system that demands absolute silence and compliance from women regarding their reproductive realities.
Their survival strategies just look completely different.
Exactly. Rose survived the crushing poverty and shame of the 1930s by deeply fundamentally internalizing the silence. She locked the trauma in a vault in her mind, put on her fancy caftans, served her imported olives, and built a fortress of denial.
She perpetuated the cycle with Baker because emotional detachment was the only survival tool she ever learned.
And Kitty, on the other hand, couldn't compartmentalize it. She couldn't survive the isolation. She tried to violently break out of the system, and it killed her.
And these two massive revelations hitting back-to-back Kitty's agonizing death in the bathroom and Rose's secret past in Chicago, they completely shatter whatever remaining compliance Baker had left. She has an epiphany in that diner.
She realizes with terrifying clarity that if she doesn't actively break the cycle right now, today, she is going to become one of those two women. She will either be broken, erased, and destroyed like Kitty, or she will survive but become a hardened, secretive, hollow shell of a person like her mother.
This realization is the engine that drives us directly into the climax of the novel. The internal pressure building inside Baker and inside that Victorian time capsule of a house perfectly mirrors the unprecedented external pressure of the outside world.
We are now in August of 1968, and both environments are about to violently explode.
It brings us to the boiling point. It is late August. The girls are all gathered in the parlor room, and the television is on. And they are watching the live, chaotic, incredibly violent broadcasts of the protests happening outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago.
The screen is filled with chaos. The police are indiscriminately using tear gas. Young protesters with long hair are bleeding in the streets, and the crowd is chanting with this deafening rhythm. The whole world is watching. The whole world is watching.
It is a moment of profound, intentional, historical convergence by the author. Think about what is happening on that screen. The youth of America, Baker's peers, are actively demanding to be seen. They are demanding political transparency, an end to systemic violence, and a voice in their own futures.
They are refusing to be hidden away.
And while the girls are mesmerized by this demand for truth, Mrs. White marches into the parlor. She sees the protest on the screen, her face contorts with anger, and she walks over and violently snaps the silver knob on the television set, plunging the room into silence.
She turns to the girls and dismissively says, "Well, we aren't watching. We don't need to see this madness."
When some of the girls tentatively protest, saying that it's real life happening outside, Miss White glares at them and says, "Your lives are real enough right here."
That deliberate act of censorship is the match that lights the powder keg for Baker. Mrs. White shutting off the television is the ultimate, literal symbol of exactly what the maternity home system does.
It forcibly cuts these women off from the world, from the flow of history and from the reality of their own generation. It demands they remain in the dark.
And Baker decides in that exact second that she is entirely done with the dark. She orchestrates a rebellion. She gathers the girls in secret away from the administrators. She doesn't hold back.
She tells them the horrifying, unvarnished truth about Kitty. She tells them about the wire coat hanger, the blood on the tiles, and the calculated cover-up by Mrs. White and Mary Ann. She forces them to see the reality of the institution that claims to protect them.
And then she declares she is leaving. She asks the other girls to cover for her during the evening head counts to buy her some time.
And before she makes her escape, she performs one final, highly symbolic act of defiance within the walls of the house.
She goes back to her bedroom closet, she takes a tool, and right underneath Kitty's gouged-in name, she aggressively carves her own.
But she doesn't just carve Baker. She carves a direct quote from the novel Jane Eyre, which she had been teaching the younger girls. So into the plaster, she permanently carves Baker, a free human being with an independent will.
It's a brilliant literary full-circle moment. Throughout the novel, Baker has been grappling with the themes of Jane Eyre. She is deeply identified with Bertha Mason, the madwoman in the attic, the woman who is deemed unacceptable, locked away, hidden from polite society, and stripped of her voice.
By physically carving that specific quote into the structure of the maternity home itself, Baker is violently refusing to be Bertha Mason. She is claiming Jane Eyre's agency. She is declaring that her will and her body belong to her alone.
The mechanics of the actual escape are incredibly tense. Baker knows she needs a distraction, so she creates a small fire in a metal trash can in a remote part of the house.
But the old, dry Victorian mansion goes up much faster than she anticipated. The fire rapidly escalates into a massive, uncontrolled blaze that genuinely threatens the structure. The alarms go off, the fire engines arrive with sirens screaming, and the street is filled with smoke and total chaos.
Under the cover of that thick smoke, Baker and her cynical roommate, Michelle, slip out the back door with their packed bags. They run into the night, sprinting toward freedom.
They manage to hitch a ride and flee south down the California coast, heading toward May's hippie commune, which is called the Grove, located deep in the redwood forest.
And this is where the narrative shifts again, because they believe they have successfully fled from oppression into sanctuary. But Schatz is far too smart a writer to offer a simple, utopian solution to the problem of patriarchy.
Baker arrives at the commune, the air is clean, people are talking about peace and love, but she very quickly starts observing the actual social dynamics of the Grove. And she realizes with sinking disappointment that this enlightened hippie commune isn't a true paradise for women either.
It is honestly so frustrating to read.
It is. Baker looks around, and she sees the enlightened men. They are sitting around quoting poetry, debating Eastern philosophy, and strumming acoustic guitars. But who is doing the actual work to keep everyone alive? The women.
The men fully expect the women to be the ones waking up at dawn to bake the bread from scratch, wash the soiled clothes in the creek, tend the gardens, and collectively care for the chaotic swarm of communal children. The aesthetic has changed, but the fundamental labor dynamic has not moved an inch.
What the author is doing here is exploring the incredible adaptability and nuance of patriarchy. She refuses to let the counterculture off the hook.
The narrative slowly reveals that the free-love hippies at the Grove and the conservative, pearl-clutching administrators back at the maternity home are essentially just two sides of the exact same coin.
How so?
Think about the underlying expectation of both systems. Whether it is the conservative mid-century establishment that demands you hide your pregnancy to protect your father's business, or the radical counterculture that demands you bake the bread while the men achieve spiritual enlightenment, both systems ultimately require women to bear the physical, domestic, and emotional costs of society's choices.
The conservative system enforces it with shame and Victorian mansions. The hippie system enforces it with peer pressure and natural dyes. But in both scenarios, the woman is relegated to a supporting role, managing the consequences while the men remain unburdened.
And realizing that she cannot simply hide in the redwood forest and bake bread for lazy poets forever, Baker is forced to confront her reality head-on. She can't philosophize her way out of it anymore because her body finally makes the decision for her.
She goes into active labor while out in the wild of the canyon, away from the main camp. The author writes this scene with such visceral intensity. Baker is in agonizing pain. She is squatting in the dirt of the woods, sweating, breathing through the contractions.
And in the middle of this intense biological event, a mosquito lands on her arm.
The mosquito is a vital detail.
It really is. Instead of swatting it away, which is the instinct, she pauses. She watches the mosquito physically pierce her skin and feed on her blood.
And in that tiny interaction, she recognizes the raw, primal, undeniable, biological reality of life. She realizes that the mosquito needs her blood to produce its eggs. It is a cycle of life that is completely indifferent to human morality or societal shame or the opinions of men in suits. It just is.
And feeling the sheer power of her own body creating life, she lets out a scream. She screams her defiance into the vastness of the redwood forest. The text describes it as a wail that carries the weight of history.
It is a scream for Kitty, who died on the floor. It is a wail for her mother, Rose, who was silenced in the 1930s. It is a scream for Ida and Marcy and Janie and all the girls who were forced to vanish in the night.
It is a moment of total biological and psychological reckoning. In that moment in the dirt, she is no longer the detached, intellectual valedictorian running a math. She is no longer the hidden, shamed girl in the oversized dress.
She is fiercely, violently present in her own physical reality, claiming the experience of birth as entirely her own, free from the sanitizing control of the institution.
Through May's frantic phone calls, Rose actually arrives at the commune to help, and Baker is rushed out of the woods to a local hospital to safely deliver the baby.
The immediate aftermath of the birth brings us to one of the most powerful images in the book. Baker is recovering, and she walks down the sterile hospital hallway. She stands before the massive glass window of the nursery.
She is looking through the glass at the rows of identical plastic bassinets. She scans the room, and she finds the bassinet holding her baby.
The card doesn't have a family name. It simply says, "Baby girl." And looking through that thick pane of glass, the text implies this massive tectonic shift within Baker's psyche. She feels an overwhelming, almost violent urge to lift her fist and completely smash the glass.
That urge is so deeply symbolic.
It's everything. She wants to reject the entire apparatus. She wants to reject the forced physical separation of the nursery window, which represents the forced emotional separation society demands of her.
She wants to reject the tidy narrative that the baby is a problem that has now been solved and is no longer hers. She wants to shatter the glass because the glass represents the invisible barrier that has been built to keep her away from her own truth.
The urge to smash the glass is the urge to smash the entire mid-century system of secrecy, shame, and laundering. It is the culmination of her radicalization.
But as powerful as Baker's fictional journey is, this is where we have to pivot. We have to discuss the meta-context provided at the very end of the book in the author's note, because reading those final few pages completely reframes the entirety of the deep dive we just went on.
This absolutely blew my mind when I reached the end. The author, Kate Schatz, drops the curtain of fiction and reveals the deeply personal genesis of this novel. She explains that the entire premise was born from a real-life confession from her own mother on Christmas Eve.
Her mother, sitting with her adult daughter, finally admitted that back in her youth she had been secretly sent away to maternity homes, and not just once, but twice. She surrendered 2 babies to closed adoptions, just like the character Rose did in the book.
Schatz writes about the profound shock of that revelation. She considered herself a feminist. She was a history buff. She had actively marched in the streets for reproductive rights.
Yet she had never known her own mother's trauma, and more importantly, she had never heard of this system operating on such a massive, industrialized scale in America.
Right. And the author's note reveals that the book is heavily inspired by and indebted to a real, groundbreaking oral history collection called The Girls Who Went Away by a journalist named Ann Fessler.
Fessler spent years tracking down these women and recording their stories. Schatz learned through this research that over 1.5 million young American women were disappeared into these coercive, hidden homes between the end of World War II and the passing of Roe v. Wade in 1973, a period sociologists now refer to as the baby scoop era.
When you introduce that historical reality, it entirely shifts the weight of the novel.
It completely reframes it. We've spent the last hour discussing this as a really compelling, well-structured historical fiction about a resilient girl named Baker fighting against the man.
But it's not just fiction. It is a meticulously researched, highly intentional memorial for 1.5 million real living women who were systematically erased. Knowing this, how does it change how you view Baker's actions in the basement?
Think about Baker hiding in her room, using a stolen pencil to frantically write down the stories of Ida, Marcy, and Michelle in her secret journal.
It becomes the defining metaphor of the work. It synthesizes the core message of our entire deep dive. Baker writing in her journal to ensure her friends are not forgotten is a direct, deliberate mirror for Kate Schatz writing this novel.
It's the fundamental act of reclaiming history. The baby scoop era relied on a concept psychologists called disenfranchised grief. The women who surrendered their children were not allowed to mourn because society told them they had done the right thing by fixing their mistake and supplying a family with a baby.
They were ordered to go back to their lives and pretend they were never mothers.
When women are denied bodily autonomy, When their physical realities are legislated and hidden away in dark washrooms and dusty Victorians, they are simultaneously denied their own historical narrative. They are literally erased from the cultural record.
They become ghosts while they're still alive.
Exactly. So this book, much like Anne Fessler's Oral Histories, is a direct intervention. It is a desperate attempt to reach back in time and restore the voices, the pain, and the humanity of an entire generation of women who were systematically told to keep their mouths shut and pretend the most traumatic event of their lives never happened.
By writing the novel, Schatz is smashing the glass of that hospital window.
She really is.
What an incredible journey to unpack. Let's take a moment to recap the incredible arc we just traced. We started in the bright, deceptive illusion of the 1968 Summer of Love, where a young woman mistakenly assumed the rhetoric of freedom applied to her biology.
We followed her terrifying descent into the reality of the underground abortion network, smelling the Lysol in the stairwell and facing the threat of prison just for asking for help.
We moved with her into the claustrophobic, restrictive world of the Victorian maternity home, where the system used fake rings, fake postcards, and psychological manipulation to launder away her identity.
We sat in the basement as the girls formed a subversive sanctuary among the latchhook rugs. We uncovered the devastating generational ghosts of Kitty and Rose.
And finally, we witnessed an explosive reclamation of truth, culminating in a birth in the woods and a refusal to be silenced ever again.
The sheer scale of the history this novel illuminates leaves us with a profound, deeply unsettling question to consider as we look at our modern world.
What that?
If an estimated 1.5 million women could be systematically hidden away, emotionally traumatized, and entirely erased from the cultural narrative of the 1950s and 60s, and if they could be kept silent for decades without the wider world acknowledging it ever happened, what other massive collective traumas are currently operating right under our noses?
Wow, yeah. Who is currently being forced into silence, hidden in plain sight today.
And perhaps most importantly, who is brave enough right now to sit in the dark, pull out a secret journal, and start writing down their names?
I want you to think back one last time to that 17-year-old girl. Imagine her standing in front of the mirror in her neat, floral wallpapered bedroom. Think about the safety pin she used to hold her skirt together.
Think about the sudden, terrifying realization settling into her bones that her body and her future were no longer entirely her own.
For 1.5 million women in America, that mirror didn't just reflect an illusion. It reflected a brutal, unforgiving reality that society actively tried to bury. They were told to forget.
But they didn't.
They just waited until someone finally had the courage to write it all down.